After Sebastian secretly took our savings back to his sister-in-law Lillian for the 8th time, I gave up hope. 01 Smack. Smack. Clatter. Clatter. All the bowls, chopsticks and the newly dyed red eggs in the house were thrown to the ground by Lillian. Isabella. It's useless for you to cling to Sebastian. It's said that when the elder brother dies, the younger brother should marry his widow. Since Martin is dead, Lillian and Little Apple are Sebastian's responsibility. Don't say that you two haven't got married yet. Even if you were married, believe it or not, I could make him divorce you and marry me. Lillian was holding Little Apple, and her saliva was flying towards me like sprinkling water. The sunlight sparsely spilled on the ground through the gaps of the old trees. I looked at Lillian's opening and closing mouth. Was I reborn? 02 In my previous life, it was also on this day. When Lillian saw that Sebastian and I seemed to be really getting married soon and we had already given out quite a lot of red eggs, she got angry and came to make a scene. She smashed my bowls, chopsticks and eggs, mocked me for a while, and took away 3 pieces of cured meat from my family before leaving triumphantly. But in the end, I still endured it and married Sebastian. How silly I was back then. I thought that marriage was just a matter between 2 people. However, Sebastian always remembered the kindness of his elder brother Martin, who worked hard every day to support him to go to university and finally died of tuberculosis. So Lillian, who lost her husband and didn't have a job, could keep buying new clothes. More than once, I saw in that yard that Lillian had washed clean white dresses and all kinds of fashionable clothes, which were drying on a full bamboo pole. As Sebastian's wife, I was only worthy of wearing Lillian's old clothes that she didn't want anymore. Often, there was also a basin of soaked clothes beside her door. Men's white shirts and rose-pink women's clothes were tangled together, as if silently mocking me. They were the real family. After Sebastian's elder brother died, Lillian suddenly became weak. Using the child as an excuse, she often called Sebastian back home. Even Sebastian secretly took money back to that home several times. Even when we had our own child later, our child had to give way to Lillian's child all the time. Good schools, new clothes, good job opportunities, and even the wedding house. Yes, when our children got married, Sebastian bought a large flat for his nephew. My son could only get married in the old house. Even when my daughter-in-law gave birth to a grandson, he didn't even take a look. Instead, he treated his nephew's child as a treasure. There were countless such things. In my previous life, the thing I regretted the most was insisting on marrying Sebastian. Sebastian didn't come until evening. 03 Sorry, Isabella. I didn't expect my sister-in-law to come and make a scene again. The factory has been busy these days. She thought that I had left her and Little Apple behind. Besides, knowing that we were going to get married, she got angry. Please don't take it to heart. Sebastian's voice was very pleasant, like a clear spring, clear and melodious. In the past, many times I thought that he shouldn't be an accountant in the factory but should be a broadcaster. With this face and this voice, he would definitely charm a lot of women. But now, when I heard him speak again and even looked at his handsome side face, my heart could no longer be stirred. Perhaps I had been disappointed too many times. Because whenever it came to Lillian's affairs, Sebastian would never stand by my side in his whole life. He silently helped me clean up the mess on the ground and then went to buy new bowls and chopsticks. When he came back, he brought a lot of vegetables and cooked 3 dishes and 1 soup. After dinner, Sebastian went to wash the dishes and then brought a thermos to mix hot water for me, asking me to take a bath quickly. When he saw that I struggled to stand up from the chair, he finally realized that something was wrong. Are you injured? If it were in my previous life, I would definitely burst into tears and pour out all the grievances in my heart to him. Then after he coaxed me symbolically for a few sentences, I would let bygones be bygones again. Forget it. I had been disappointed too many times in my previous life. Now, whatever I said didn't make sense. I didn't even want to say much. It's okay. It's just because I've been sitting for a long time. I avoided his outstretched hand, took my clothes and went to the bathroom. When I came out of the bathroom, Sebastian was already waiting for me with a bottle of iodine. Sit down. He pushed me onto the chair, carefully rolled up my trouser legs, looked at the large wound on my leg with distress, and carefully applied medicine to me. He really looked like he cared about me deeply. If he hadn't done so many stupid things in my previous life. If I hadn't seen the new clothes on Lillian today. If I hadn't been reborn. I almost thought that he would really be a good husband. I stared at him firmly and said, Sebastian, let's not get married. Sebastian's hand paused, and he looked up. What did you say? I said we shouldn't get married. I closed my eyes. The unwillingness, quarrels and resentment in my previous life had completely worn out my love for him, even though I knew that there was really nothing between him and Lillian. Even though I knew that they were innocent. Even though I also knew that in my previous life, except for being confused about Lillian's affairs, he was good in other aspects. However, I really didn't want to continue anymore. Only I knew all the hardships. Foreseeing that I was so determined, Sebastian's eyes quickly turned red at the corners. Isabella, how can you say such a thing so easily? I sneered. Where was it easy? It took me a whole lifetime to understand this truth. Now that I have a chance to start over, if I still marry him, then I'm the fool. Sebastian thought that I was just angry because of what Lillian did when she came to my place today. Before leaving, he asked me to calm down. I knew that Sebastian had never taken my intention to cancel the engagement seriously. Because in his opinion, we had been engaged for 3 years. During these 3 years, I always put him first in everything, listened to him and respected his widowed sister-in-law. I had never really argued with Lillian about anything. In his eyes, it was impossible for me to leave him. So, he dared to make me feel wronged in everything. He even thought that I deserved to endure all these. What he didn't know was that after I said the engagement was cancelled today, there would be no possibility for us anymore. 06 The next day, I peeled all the eggs that were broken by Lillian yesterday and found a jar to pickle them. Nowadays, eggs are not easy to get. Although the wedding is off, it's shameful to waste food. After tidying up the house, I took the family's money and went to the street. No matter what happened next, life had to go on. Besides canceling the engagement with Sebastian, I also planned to buy back all the books I had left behind before and read them again. In my previous life, my junior high school education had always been a pain point for me. Now that I've come back, no matter what, I also want to take the college entrance examination and go to university again. In this lifetime, I don't want to be trapped in that small world and be tortured all my life. The bookstore in the town wasn't very big, but it wasn't difficult to buy high school textbooks. I spent quite a while choosing and finally bought all the materials. I also selected several sets of test papers and planned to study by myself when I got back. Factory director, this is wrong. We can't understand what these English words mean at all. Just as I was about to leave the bookstore, I saw 2 people sitting on the bench in the bookstore, sweating profusely with anxiety. I curiously leaned over to take a look and found that they were holding a small English notebook in one hand and an English book in the other hand for comparison. After looking at it for a long time, they obviously didn't figure it out. I couldn't help but say, "Is the thing in your hands a manual?" The 2 people looked up at me, and one of them said, "Girl, do you know what this means?" I took the manual in his hand and took a look. "Is this the manual for imported forged steel equipment?" The 2 people were stunned for a moment and then quickly nodded. "Girl, can you really understand it?" I hesitated for a moment and then nodded. In my previous life, my son started learning English from junior high school. At that time, his English was not good, and I accompanied him to find many teachers for tutoring until his grades improved. During that period, I also developed a great interest in English and later learned it with my son. Gradually, I could also take on some online translation jobs, so I was quite confident in English. Seeing that I nodded, although the 2 people were a bit skeptical, they still hesitated for a moment and then quickly opened one page of the manual and asked, "Girl, look at this. Do you know what it means?" I took a look and found that it was an introduction to the different functions of 2 accessories of the forged steel equipment, so I started to translate it. The cutoff valve has a large opening and closing torque and it's rather laborious to open and close. Its height is smaller than that of the gate valve but the length. After listening to my translation of a paragraph, the 2 people gradually showed an ecstatic look in their eyes. Then they took out another notebook from their briefcase. "Girl, look at this. Can you understand it?" I took the booklet and took a look. I found that it was also a manual for the accessories of the forged steel equipment, so I nodded again. The 2 people immediately got excited and asked if I could go to their factory and help translate the manual for their master. I looked at the books in my hand and hesitated. The 2 people thought that I was going to refuse, so they quickly said that the remuneration was negotiable. The remuneration offered by the 2 people was quite generous, so I put down the books in my hand first and went to the factory with them. When I got there, I found out that the older one was the director of a large steel factory. This time, there was a problem with one of the imported machines, and the master couldn't understand the manual and didn't dare to repair it casually. They couldn't think of any other way, so they went to the bookstore to try their luck. Unexpectedly, they happened to meet me there. I knew they were in a hurry, so after Director Edwin called the maintenance master, I translated the content in the manual according to the questions they raised. By the time the factory repaired the machine, it was almost midnight. Director Edwin attached great importance to this matter and had been staying here all the time. At this moment, seeing that the machine finally started up, he happily said that he would invite me to dinner before I went back. I declined. Director Edwin didn't say anything more. Instead, he gave me the remuneration for today and found a car to send me back. Before leaving, he asked me to leave my home address, gave me his business card, said a lot of thanks, and said that there might be other things that would trouble me in the future. When I got home, I looked at the 200 yuan in my hand and didn't say a word for a long time. At this time, Sebastian was already an accountant in a factory, but his monthly salary was only 55 yuan. I just went to the steel factory for a while, and when I came back, I got 200 yuan as remuneration. That was already Sebastian's salary for 4 months. Holding the money in my hand, I was even more determined to take the college entrance examination. At this time, there were opportunities everywhere, and translation was one of the very popular jobs. I thought that I had found my goal. The next day, I went to the bookstore and bought all the books and test papers I had chosen yesterday. Besides, because of what happened yesterday, I also deliberately bought a full set of English books, as well as many English-related books and English dictionaries. In the following days, every morning I would steam the meals for the whole day so that I could save the time for cooking. Of course, I also got up very early. I recited texts in the morning, and in the afternoon, I did test papers and read materials. The English books and English materials were not just for decoration but for real study. If Director Edwin hadn't introduced another translation job to me later, I would never have gone out except for buying groceries. Today, Director Edwin asked his secretary to bring a person here. That person was a German named Alexander, who was here on a business trip. Alexander originally brought a translator with him, but in the past 2 days, perhaps because of acclimatization, the translator fell ill. So after several rounds, Director Edwin thought of me. The secretary said that if I took this job, the daily salary would be 81 yuan and asked if I could accept it. Of course I could. So in the following days, I would arrive at the hotel where Alexander was staying on time at 8 o'clock every morning and follow him until the work of the day was completed before I went back home. Although it was a bit tiring, after a few days, I also got to know quite a lot of people. During that time, some people also asked for my address and said that if they needed anything in the future, they could contact me. This time, as Alexander's translator, I earned a total of 400 yuan. This 400 yuan, plus the previous 200 yuan, was enough for me to review at home comfortably without worrying about food and drink. If Sebastian hadn't come to my door again 2 days later, I would have almost forgotten about Sebastian and Lillian. Sebastian thought that I had calmed down, so he came to my door. In my previous life, it was always like this. Every time there was a conflict between me and Lillian, he always stood on Lillian's side, leaving me to deal with the negative emotions brought by him alone after the incident. If I hadn't been so angry so many times, I wouldn't have got breast cancer and died early. Isabella, the Mid-Autumn Festival is coming soon. Here is the rice noodles distributed by the factory. You. I blocked the door and didn't let him in. I have nothing to do with you now. Don't bring me anything next time. I said indifferently. And I didn't care about it either. After experiencing my previous life, I naturally knew that what Sebastian's factory distributed this time should be 2 boxes of mooncakes, 3 caddies of rock sugar and a pack of brown sugar. And Sebastian took all these to his sister-in-law Lillian and brought the cheapest rice noodles to me. As for why I knew this, it was completely because in my previous life, Lillian would always secretly tell me these things on purpose just to make me angry. And in my previous life, I was really angered to death by this. Isabella, don't joke. Sebastian's face was serious. The engagement is fine. How can it be cancelled casually? Don't be so childish. I was almost laughed out of anger. Lillian came to make trouble at my place, but in his opinion, it was still me who was being naughty? And I was joking? So it means that I, Isabella, deserved to be bullied by him and Lillian. I didn't want to waste words with him at all and just raised my hand. Smack. Sebastian stood there in a daze, looking at me. Your sister-in-law came to my place, the future sister-in-law of hers, and smashed my house. She also said that she wanted me to break up with you and marry you herself. Do you think it's also me who is being naughty? I asked him impolitely. Sebastian paused for a moment and then said helplessly, she didn't mean that. She's just afraid that after I marry you and we have children we will neglect little Apple. You should understand her. So what? Are you planning to marry into 2 families after marriage? Sebastian avoided my question and started the same old argument as in my previous life, my brother is gone. Little Apple has no father. As his uncle, I should. I waved my hand and interrupted him, so, what on earth is your grudge against me? Sebastian was stunned. I continued, to what extent do you hate me that you would drag me into the quagmire of your family, sacrificing myself just to let your sister-in-law and nephew live a good life? Sebastian was startled and looked up in disbelief. Do you think marrying me is like stepping into a quagmire? Why not? My previous life was the best proof. Her Lillian's child had Sebastian to support him, so he was admitted to a good university later and entered the Fortune Global 500 after graduation, while my child was the one that Sebastian raised in a free-range way since childhood. He was self-abased and timid and only went to a second-tier university. He didn't get married and have children until he was almost 33. After marriage, my daughter-in-law quarreled with my son every day because she heard about what Sebastian had done. Life was in a mess. So isn't this enough to prove it, Isabella? I always thought that you understood me. My brother. I quickly interrupted him. Sebastian, just do me a favor, okay? I don't want to have anything to do with you for the rest of my life. I endured your sister-in-law's provocations time and time again for you. Just consider it as for the past 3 years when I treated you wholeheartedly. For the sake of me being a qualified fiancé, please let me go, okay? Sebastian's eyes were red and he couldn't help but shed tears. He turned his face away. Isabella, I know you're still angry. I also know that my sister-in-law was wrong this time. I will definitely pay attention in the future. I wanted to speak but he hurriedly interrupted me. Isabella, don't refuse for now. Think about it. He looked at me pleadingly. I beg you, think it over carefully. I'll also let you calm down. Can you answer me after you've thought it through? After saying that, Sebastian gave me a deep look and left with red eyes. I closed the door and sat down at the table again. In my previous life, I also had a big quarrel with Sebastian because of Lillian and Little Apple. At first, he also asked me to be more tolerant of Lillian. At first, he also promised me that he would be more careful in the future, but it was useless. Whenever Lillian came to our place, whenever something happened over there, he still rushed to the front at the first time. So of course I wouldn't be soft-hearted. Because Sebastian's promises were worthless. I thought that I had made myself clear this time and that I could finally start reviewing with all my efforts. But suddenly, Sebastian didn't seem to be so busy anymore and started coming to bring me things frequently. Moreover, despite my stern refusals, he even invited my relatives to come and mediate. My parents had my sister and me. My sister got a husband to live in our family, so my parents spent most of their time in our hometown helping my sister take care of her children, and I got to know Sebastian through my aunt's introduction. At that time, I had just graduated from high school, and Sebastian had just graduated from university. My aunt knew Sebastian's mother, so she introduced us to each other. At that time, Sebastian's brother was still alive. I saw that he had a good appearance, a nice personality, and was careful, so I agreed to continue getting to know him. Sebastian also seemed quite satisfied with me, and we gradually got in touch. Later, we got engaged smoothly. If Martin hadn't passed away later and Lillian hadn't started causing trouble, I think Sebastian and I should have already got married more than a year ago. This time, seeing that I seemed to be serious, Sebastian was a bit panicked and directly called my aunt over. Who knew that when my aunt came to persuade me, Lillian came again? My aunt had just sat down to take a breath and hadn't even started to say anything when Lillian came again. As soon as she saw my aunt, she rolled her eyes. So it's you who meddled in other people's business and introduced this vixen to my Sebastian? As soon as Lillian arrived, she put on the airs of being a sister-in-law. My aunt was stunned and asked me, who is this? I held back my laughter. This is Sebastian's sister-in-law. Only then did my aunt come to her senses. Oh, you're Jing Liang's widow. Sit down, sit down. We're all family. Lillian snorted coldly. Whose family with you? I tell you, my Sebastian doesn't like your slut at all. If she wants to harm men, she can go find other men. Don't pester my Sebastian anymore. Do you hear me? My aunt was furious. I've seen strange people before, but this was the first time I saw such a strange one. My aunt said angrily, what are you talking about? My Isabella and Sebastian have already held an engagement banquet. Is this how your Liu family usually bullies our Isabella? Where's Sebastian? Ask him to come here. Lillian sneered, who do you think you are? My Sebastian is a chief accountant in the factory. He holds all the money in the whole factory in his hands. Do you think he'll come just because you ask him to? Bah! As soon as she finished speaking, Lillian smashed our family's bowls and chopsticks again. Perhaps thinking that there was an elder in my family for a rare occasion, when she smashed the bowls and chopsticks, she also smashed several pieces of our furniture. My aunt was so angry that her face turned pale and she fainted directly. Oh no. Originally, I just wanted to let my aunt see what Lillian was like and stop asking me to marry into that family, but I didn't expect that my aunt was really fainted by anger. I quickly found a car and sent her to the hospital. Well, this time, Sebastian not only had to pay for my furniture and bowls and chopsticks but also had to pay for the medical expenses. Seeing that my aunt was old and it was rare to have Sebastian as a sucker to cover the costs, I asked the doctor to give my aunt a comprehensive physical examination. After confirming that there was no problem, I asked the doctor to prescribe a lot of nutritional products. Only then did I send my aunt back home 10 days later. Sebastian was also hit hard this time and didn't come to my door for a long time. In the following few months, besides reviewing high school textbooks, I also took on several translation jobs. Director Edwin of the steel factory was shocked when he later learned that I had learned English by myself. After knowing that I was going to take the college entrance examination, he recommended me to a night school. Many students there were also going to take the college entrance examination this year. Some of the students were even company bosses. The atmosphere in the night school was good. Everyone would share good materials, books, or test papers with others. I also got to know quite a lot of people in the night school. After everyone knew that I was also working as a part-time translator, some classmates introduced several jobs to me. There were 36 people in our class. Among them were company bosses, fresh graduates who had failed the exam last year, housewives, and factory technicians. One person who impressed me deeply was a woman with a 3-year-old child. I called her Sister Hong. She had to serve her mother-in-law during the day and take her child to class at night. 3-year-old children are usually very naughty, but her child was very obedient. A comic book could keep him occupied for the whole night. This made the classmates who had been initially worried that the child would disrupt our class also give their tacit consent to her bringing the child. When it was the month before the college entrance examination, one night Sister Hong's husband came to find her. He grabbed Sister Hong's hair and dragged her out, shouting dirty words all the way, saying that Sister Hong was overambitious but had a bad fate, that she still had such ideas even after getting married, and whether she wanted to climb up the social ladder and have an affair with others and so on. Sister Hong let her husband beat her and just silently protected the child in her arms. On the third day, Sister Hong didn't come again. Sister Hong's matter hardly attracted too much attention from everyone because the college entrance examination was just around the corner. In the month of the college entrance examination, I turned down all the translation jobs and prepared for the exam seriously. The moment I walked out of the examination room, I knew that I was sure to pass. On the day when the results were announced, I made an appointment with my classmates and waited early at the school gate. Even Director Edwin knew that the results would be announced today and came early with his secretary to wait on the spot. As soon as it was 8 o'clock, the school gate opened. Several teachers came out with a big red paper. One person was pasting paste on the honor board, and 2 people worked together to stick the red paper on the honor board. The crowd rushed over. I was also pulled by everyone and joined in. Although I knew that my results should be okay this time, when I saw my name in the bright second place, I couldn't help shedding tears. Isabella, you've passed the exam. Well done. Director Edwin looked at the name on the list and looked at me with satisfaction. In the crowd, I actually saw Sebastian looking at me. Across the sea of people, his eyes looking at me were very complicated. There was disbelief, loss, sadness, and admiration. He subconsciously walked towards me. Then, I saw Lillian following him. Lillian saw the name on the list, then turned her head to look at me in disbelief. Then, I saw her reach out and pinch Little Apple hard. Little Apple burst into loud crying, which also made Sebastian's steps forward pause for a moment. Uncle, I want Uncle. Uncle, hold me. I was ready to watch Sebastian go back to comfort the child. After all, in my previous life, Little Apple was Sebastian's darling. Otherwise, he wouldn't have bought a large flat for him. But this time, to my surprise, Sebastian actually walked towards me without looking back. He walked through the crowd, and his tall figure stood in front of me, with a bit of complexity on his face. Isabella, you took the college entrance examination. I nodded indifferently. Actually, I had wanted to take the exam the year before last. But that year, Sebastian's brother had just died of tuberculosis, and Lillian was constantly complaining of being unwell here and there. I spent most of my time helping to take care of Little Apple. Last year, I also wanted to take the exam, but Sebastian said that the competition for the college entrance examination was so fierce now that I might not be able to pass. Besides, even if I passed by chance, which school should I apply for? There was no university in our small county. If I passed the exam, I could only leave for other cities. What about our engagement? So, after careful consideration, I gave up. Once I gave up, I stepped into the quagmire of this marriage. Now that I've been admitted to university, I'm definitely going to leave here. During the months of preparing for the exam, Sebastian had come to find me, but every time when it came to breaking up, he asked me to calm down. Now, standing here, I solemnly told him again, Sebastian, our engagement is cancelled. This time, it wasn't asking for his opinion. It was just informing him. Seeing Lillian holding the child and following in a flustered manner not far away, I saw for the first time that there was an impatient look in Sebastian's eyes. Isabella, what are you doing? Why are you pestering Sebastian again? Do you think you're so proud just because you've been admitted to university? I tell you, it's impossible for you to marry my Sebastian. You, enough. Sebastian roared, which made Lillian freeze on the spot. I didn't want to see their entanglement anymore and turned around and left. In the evening, some colleagues from the night school who got along well with me wanted to celebrate for me. Director Edwin said that he would invite everyone to have dinner together at a state-owned restaurant. Since I helped Director Edwin translate the maintenance report of the machines in his factory last time, he had introduced several more business deals to me, and we also had exchanges during festivals. Tonight, he was even more insistent on inviting those colleagues from the night school who got along well with me to have dinner together. When we arrived at the state-owned restaurant, a young man took a look at us at the door and walked towards our table. Director Edwin saw the person coming and smiled and waved his hand. Isabella, this is my nephew, Edwin. Edwin looked at me. Hello, Comrade Isabella. After we got to know each other, we sat down again. At the dinner table, everyone congratulated me. Among our classmates in the night school, only 3 passed the exam this time. And I was one of them. Tonight, some people were happy and some were sad, so everyone inevitably let loose a bit. Soon, some people got drunk. After dinner, Director Edwin saw that the others were a bit drunk and volunteered to send them back one by one. Edwin, Isabella doesn't live far away. Please help me send her back. Director Edwin smiled and patted Edwin's shoulder and left with the others first. Edwin and I looked at each other in surprise. It took me a while to realize. Director Edwin wanted to introduce his nephew to me. Fortunately, Edwin had a rather outgoing personality, so it wasn't too embarrassing on the way back. Chatting all the way back, I found out that Edwin had also read a lot of books and was currently studying at a university in Beijing. When we arrived at my door, he left. I turned around and saw a person squatting by the wall. It was Sebastian. When he saw me, he stood up. I was wondering how you could endure my sister-in-law's making trouble so many times over the years. So you've already found someone else? Sebastian took a step forward. Isabella, don't you have a conscience? You, smack. My slap heavily interrupted Sebastian's unfinished words. Get out. I stepped aside and pointed to the entrance of the alley. Sebastian's eyes were red at the corners, and his mouth moved. I'm sorry, I just. He lowered his head and didn't dare to look at me. Sebastian, we have nothing to do with each other anymore. And I hope we won't see each other again in the future. I walked past him and slammed the door shut. I was admitted to a university in Beijing. Before leaving, I went to visit Sister Hong from the night school. Her face was bruised and purple, and her arms were also covered with purple and blue marks. Before leaving, I left 100 yuan for her. Sister Hong, life is still long. How you want to live depends on what you think. I gave her a deep look and then took my luggage and went to the railway station. When I arrived at the street corner, I saw Director Edwin driving a car waiting at the intersection. When he saw me, Edwin took my luggage and put it in the car together. Director Edwin said with a smile, Isabella, why didn't you tell me that you were going to Beijing today? Look, what a coincidence. Edwin is also going to Beijing today. You're both from the same hometown. You can take care of each other when you arrive in Beijing, right? Edwin blushed and looked at me. On the train to Beijing, Edwin was busy here and there. When we arrived in Beijing, he first went to the school with me and then left. My days in university were very fulfilling. I majored in English and Spanish. During my university years, I started taking on some translation jobs. During that time, I even went to Germany once with Director Edwin and Edwin. Director Edwin's steel factory needed to purchase a batch of machines, and I went as a translator accompanying them. Of course, I also received letters from Sebastian during that time. He even came to find me once. But things had changed. No matter what he did, it was impossible for me and him in this lifetime. The last time we met, Sebastian didn't look well. It seemed that he was under a lot of pressure. I didn't ask anything and didn't care either. Seeing that I seemed to have really let go, he left dejectedly. Watching his leaving figure, I turned around and walked towards the dormitory. Life is still long. And my life has just begun. Sebastian, extra story, after Isabella left, my relatives introduced several girls to me. I refused them one by one. I thought that if my wife wasn't Isabella in this life, then it would all be meaningless. 2 years later, when some elders in the family saw that I still didn't have any intention of getting married, they tentatively asked me what I thought of Lillian. I frowned. I just felt disgusted. The relative who said this was scared by my fierce look and left silently. After the relative left, Lillian walked in from outside. Sebastian, what do you mean? This was the first time that Lillian faced this matter directly. What do you mean? Don't you understand yet? Perhaps the disgust in my eyes was too obvious. Lillian's face turned pale. To be honest, seeing her like that, I felt an indescribable sense of satisfaction in my heart. Is she sad now? When she repeatedly went to make trouble for Isabella, why didn't she think that Isabella would be sad? Yes, I had been putting up with her all the time. But that was also for the sake of my brother and little Apple. Besides that, what could she compare with Isabella? Was it because she was a few years older than Isabella, or because she only had an education level equivalent to the 3rd grade of primary school? After Isabella left, I also reduced the number of times I went back to this home. My brother had already passed away. A single man and a single woman should avoid suspicion. I planned to pack up the things at home and take most of them to the dormitory in the factory tomorrow. But what I didn't expect was that. Coincidentally, Lillian opened the door of my room at night. Fortunately, I wasn't in a deep sleep. However, the noise here still attracted outsiders. Everyone looked at Lillian standing at my door with her clothes in disarray, and their ambiguous gazes almost made me feel like I was being tortured. But I really didn't do anything. The next day, some relatives from the family came to do some ideological work on me. The implication of their words was that I should be brave enough to take responsibility for what I had done. I immediately smashed things. I didn't do anything, so where did the so-called being brave enough to take responsibility come from? I directly moved out of the house. However, Lillian then made a scene at the factory. The factory director came to me in person and asked me to go back and think it over carefully. On the day when I packed my things and left, everyone looked at me as if they thought I was a scumbag. I silently rented another room and lived outside. I would never go back to that home again. Anyway, after being fired by the factory, I went to Beijing once. I saw Isabella. She was different from before. The gentle girl in my memory was gone, replaced by a capable professional in the workplace. I heard that she majored in foreign languages. I also heard that she had already bought a house in Beijing before graduating. I heard that there were quite a lot of people chasing after her, but Isabella's gaze towards me had also changed. She looked at me as if I were a complete stranger. It was just my imagination to think of the Isabella who cared about me wholeheartedly after our engagement in the past few years, who was willing to take on the responsibility of taking care of little Apple for the sake of taking care of me, and who was busy with daily chores around me every day. When I met her, she kept looking at her watch frequently. I knew it was time for me to leave. She said to me expressionlessly, "Goodbye." I left dejectedly. I knew that there would be no chance to see each other again. "I'm sorry, Isabella. Only after you left did I realize how wrong I had been before. What I can do now is to stay away from your life. And watch you be happy." What Isabella didn't know was that I didn't leave Beijing either. I thought that even if I couldn't be with her, but being able to stay in the city where she was, it should also be another kind of companionship, right? A few years later, I heard from relatives in my hometown that my sister-in-law Lillian left with little Apple. As for where they went, no one knew. The reason for their departure was that I heard she got involved with a man in our hometown, and the man's wife found out about it. The man's wife brought people to make trouble at their place. I heard that 2 of her teeth were knocked out. Even her clothes were stripped off and she was left on the street to be publicly humiliated. She couldn't stay in our hometown anymore, so she disappeared. I didn't go to look for them. It's just that in the following days, I would occasionally think of little Apple again. I wondered how he was doing, but what I thought of more often was still Isabella. I thought that if I hadn't been so bad in the past, and even if I had firmly stood in front of Isabella when my sister-in-law Lillian made trouble for the first time, she definitely wouldn't have left me, right? But it was already too late when I realized all this. I'm sorry, Isabella. The end.